So I want to take a moment to welcome all of you. My name is Liz Kirchhoff, and I'm an adult services librarian at the Barrington Area Library. And we're really glad that you can join us for this program that we are hosting in partnership with the Chicago Living Corridors. Before we begin, I'd like to sort of share a few housekeeping details with you. So first of all, if you're in the area, I'd like to do a little pitch for a program that we have starting next week. So we have a seed library. We had it last year and it's just about to open up again for the year. So I wanted to make sure that I told you all about it. It is in our newsletter at the library, but this is basically what they look like. So put that a little closer for you. And each one of those has 5 different packets of seeds. And they're sort of random, but they're all sort of themed. So we have things like pizza and salsa and herbs and veggies and landscape, which is sort of all of our natives that we'll be talking about today. The flowers, grab bag, which is like all my leftovers, the stuff I wasn't sure where to put anywhere else. And then experimental, which is stuff that's like fun to do with your kids. So we have pumpkins, we've got popcorn and cantaloupe and just things I thought were sort of interesting and kind of cool to do. So there is no registration for this program. It is first come, first serve. And if you're in the area, you should stop by. The dates for it to begin are March 3rd and March 5th, and the hours are 10 to 2. So we would love to have you stop by and visit us and pick up a couple of seed kits. The limit will be 3 kits, and each kit has 5 sets of seeds in it. So it's kind of a lot. It'll hold you, I promise. So a couple of other housekeeping things. I would ask you to take a moment to mute your microphones and keep them muted during our presentation today. There's a lot of us and that background noise can get a little bit distracting. We are recording this program and it will be available on our YouTube channel early next week. And I will also email you all a link to the program so that you have that if you wanted to go back and look at the slides or revisit something. And then finally, because there's so many of us, I would like to ask that you use the chat box that you will see on my screen. It's in the bottom right-hand corner. So if you have some questions as Monica is talking today, you can use that chat box and ask your questions. And at the end, we will take a little time and ask Monica some of the things that you're all wondering about. So I'm going to go ahead and turn things over now to Peggy Simonson. Peggy has been a volunteer with the Citizens for Conservation for 16 years. She's a former president of CFC, and she continues to serve on the board of directors. Peggy is currently chair of CFC's Community Education Committee. Peggy?
Thanks, Liz. I'd like to see what pizza seeds look like.
I would solidly grow pizza if I could.
Pizza tree.
I'm pleased to have you all joining us tonight. In addition to Citizens for Conservation, I'm also on the board of Chicago Living Corridors, which is one of the sponsors of the program tonight. And I know that some of you have been attending many of these programs and you know about CLC, but I'd like to do just a quick introduction for those of you who are new to Chicago Living Corridors. So Monica, if you'll show the next slide. I want, you can be reading about the mission while I'm talking, but I want to just tell you there's 3 main things that you need to know about CLC. First, our goal is to increase the improved habitat on private property in the Chicago area, and that's primarily people's yards. Secondly, we are mapping individual properties in the Chicago area based on the organizations that are represented. And Monica, if you'll go to the next slide. The Chicago Living Corridors is an umbrella organization, and we are made up of the founding organizations, which you see here. Citizens for Conservation is one of them. Our president of Chicago Living Corridors is Carol Rice, and she is with the Wildflower Propagation and Preservation Committee. Preservation and Propagation Committee in McHenry County. So these founding organizations, but since our founding, we've also increased our participating organizations with these ones listed here, including RedStem, who is a company from our speaker today. So our goal with the map, this was just a static map you're seeing here, but if you go onto the website of chicagolivingcorridors.org and click on the map, it's interactive. So you can look to see which organizations are working in which areas of the Chicago area. So if you are wanting to, if you already have good habitat in your yard and you'd like to have a dot on the map, you need to go through one of these organizations to do so, but the map will tell you who's working in which areas. The Conservation Foundation out of Naperville covers a lot of territory with their Conservation at Home program. But the rest of us mostly work, for example, CFC, Citizens for Conservation, works just in the greater Barrington area. And you know, so we each have a bit of a territory to for our focus. Monica's programs are the black dots on the map, and that's primarily in the city of Chicago. So I just also want to give you a bit of a heads up. Citizens for Conservation sponsors a big native plant sale each year. We had to cancel last year, but we're going to do it this year, and our pre-orders start next Monday on March 1st. So you can go on the citizensforconservation.org website and click on native plant sales, and you have a long list of the kinds of plants that are available with the descriptions of them, and you can pre-order between March 1st and April 18th. And then the sale itself or pickup for the pre-orders will be that first weekend in March. I think it's March 6th, I mean, in May 6th, 7th, and 8th, I think, if it's right. It's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, anyway, that weekend. So just so you have that in mind, if you're getting excited about starting to order some plants. So you get the seeds from the library and the little plugs from our plant sale. And with that, I just would really I'm very pleased to be able to introduce our speaker tonight. Monica Buckley is owner of RedStem Native Landscapes, and she designs, builds, and maintains native plant gardens for the delight of her owners and her customers, and for the delight of the sustenance of wildlife. Monica spent most of her childhood summers playing near her Chicago home, where giant silk moths emerged from homely brown cocoons, yellow tiger swallowtail butterflies graced the treetops, and beautiful songbirds dive-bombed for caterpillars. Life would take Monica into the world of publishing for many years until her passion for native gardens and the wildlife they support demanded her full attention, and she opened RedStem in 2013. So you are in for a delightful program tonight, creating native plant gardens. So with that, we'll turn it over to Monica.
Well, thank you so much, Peggy, and thank you everybody for showing up to this presentation. I'm very excited about it. I haven't done this before, where I present start to finish from the time I look at a yard. You can see the yard here. There's basically a lawn. So it was a very wonderful kind of blank palette. And it's going to be fun. We're going to go from sort of beginning concept through installation and beyond. So this was installed in April 2019. And it's actually, so not quite mature. It takes about 3 years for a garden, a native plant garden to mature, for all of its plants to mature. So you'll see what it looks like as of, I think we have a couple of winter slides, so as of very recently. But it's still evolving, which is one of the fun things about native plant gardens. They actually never stop evolving, which some of you are probably well aware of. But we have a lot to cover. I want to talk about some of the butterflies and moths that are attracted by some of the plants, and we just have a lot to talk about. So let's get going. I promise there are only 2 slides like this with just print on them. So the existing conditions we have, I just wanted you to see there's a lot of different microhabitats in this backyard. There's sunny, shady, wet, and dry. And then there's some other stuff that you can read. We'll see all this. We'll see the wires and the shed and the shade structure. There's flooding in the back. There's a park, big park behind the yard, which is very cool, but there's this weedy ditch there that overflows and causes the back to be flooded. It's a 50s house, which is cool in a way for all of you with older houses, because sometimes these new construction houses, they scrape off all the topsoil because it's not that stable to build on. And then they build there and then put on a little bit of topsoil and a bunch of sod and a few bushes. So some of you may be familiar with that, but this is a nice old yard with the house toward the front and clay loam soil and pretty neutral soil. There's some areas where it's a little bit more acidic under the evergreen trees. And one more slide. This is the other slide with writing on it. The homeowner loved him right away. He wanted to reduce the lawn dramatically. He was saying, why am I spending all this time mowing? And basically he understood, he had been reading, he understood that lawn, especially the very well kept emerald green lawn, does very little for our wildlife. It does very little for absorbing water. It's just kind of should be in Scotland. And then he wanted to remove existing structures. He wanted plants in the back to absorb the flooding, and he was okay with wild, which we also love. So we're going to create a small seating area. But I think, and you see it's a little bolder here, we had to create a path for the greyhound. This is the greyhound we're talking about. This is Riley, and this is the park behind. And Riley, like all greyhounds, loves to run. Come on, run the balls. Come on. Here he comes. You're going to get a look at the yard. There it is. There's the shed. Making another circuit. You lost him there. Whoop, and there he goes again. So basically we have to accommodate this dog because he is the king of the hill here. So we start with the plat of survey, and in this plat of survey we have, we can see that the lot is about 60 foot wide and 206 feet in length. We're not going to worry about the front. We're basically dealing with the back. There's a front area. The house is here, and then there's a driveway in concrete, a big concrete area, apron in front of the garage, and then the garage. So zooming in, it has a utilities easement. We'll talk about that. We talked about that. Those are wires that are hanging. And then this is the old shed. You might have had a glimpse of it when the dog ran by. And this is a shade structure, sort of euphemistically called a pergola by whoever did this, this plat of survey. So we're playing around with this and we're telling ourselves, oops, here's what we're going to do. I put X's on the structures we're removing. This is the flooded area. There's really a large area that floods in this property. So we definitely want to take care of that, but it does also allow us to have some species that like that, which is very cool because we have several different microhabitats. So here is where we take the plat of survey and we put it into CAD so that we can move things around and play around with it. We're going to go on a little tour photographically. We're going to start like here looking at the yard side of the garage and then go in a clockwise direction. We missed the back of the garage here. There's a garage. So there are a bunch of weeds back here. You can also see some ostrich fern, which is actually a native. And when I thought about this, I took pretty much everything out of this garden, and maybe taking out the ostrich fern was a mistake because it's happy here and it is a native. I may very well go to the homeowner who may be actually watching with us and ask him if we can put the ostrich ferns back in. We'll talk about that later. You see where there's no gutter on the garage, so the water falls here, and then there's like a 2-foot drop. We'll see that a little bit more clearly later on. So this was August 18th, 2019, the fall before we installed it the following spring. These are non-native trees that we are retaining. They're healthy. We really try not to take out healthy plants that are actually not bad for the environment. And the spruce and the arborvitaes are actually not bad for birds. They like to hide in it. Now you see the utilities that we have to be careful about planting under. This is a weeping willow, which is a Chinese plant. It's obviously non-native, but we're going to talk about willows because the moths and butterflies that use our willows can also use this willow. So it's actually very nice. We're going to talk about willows more because they're underutilized and very important. If you're familiar with the work of Doug Tallamy, whose graduate students shook trees and counted the caterpillars, oaks actually host 534 species. They're just amazing. Oaks are number 1. But willows and cherries come in second at 456. And most of the butterflies and moths, as I was saying, in our area that whose caterpillars eat willows will eat the weeping willow. So we're going to definitely keep this guy because it's big and provides food for a lot of little animals. So there's that. We're going around. That's the shed that's coming out. There's a kind of a willow stump there. Over here, there's some more weedy stuff. There's some Rudbeckia, some black-eyed Susan, but it's the short-lived kind, Rudbeckia hirta. It's a pioneer species. You know, it'll stay in a planting and then leave. The one that I like to use is the Rudbeckia fulgida. We'll see some of that later. It's a true perennial. So there's that crazy shade structure with more of these ferns that I should have saved. And the weedy area just over here next to the garage. We dug everything out and we used a sod cutter on this stuff on the sod. But this area was a problem the next year. It was just still full of weeds. So we had to take some time going back after those weeds. So I want to talk about willows. I promised you. Salix is the name of the genus, and they are definitely underused. I want to encourage everybody to use them. We have a weeping willow in this garden. We also planted right next to it a pussy willow. So we're going to talk about that. But there are a few other willows. Black willow is big and aggressive. And if you live where you have a river side behind your house and the shoreline is being degraded, this is a great plant for that. Consider these big, people are afraid of plants like willows that tend to sucker. But if you have a lot of space and you have a wet site, black willow is great. Drier sites, prairie willow. Same thing, it will sucker. The pussy willow is more like a tree. You can, and any of these you can control by trimming them. So I'm going to talk about the butterflies and moths that eat these because they're wonderful. First I'm going to talk about the pussy willow. So this is the famous little pussy willows. We have at least one person on here, a client of mine who loves her pussy willows. I can see you, Leslie, for some reason. I can't see anybody else. So these are the pussies, the little buds. This is what happens when they flower out. And as you can see, this is very early in the season when nothing else is blooming. So this is an important source of nectar and pollen very early in the season. And besides that, it's beautiful. And speaking of beautiful, this is the Polyphemus moth. And the Polyphemus moth eats willows. Its larvae eat willows. You don't see them. They're plentiful actually still in our northern suburbs. They are nocturnal, so you don't really see them, but they are 3.5 inches long. They're big. This is one of our giant silk moths, a beautiful creature, and it actually eats a lot of different trees, but willows are among them. This is the morning cloak. I love this butterfly. It's just so regal looking, and it also is unusual in that it spends, like a few other of our butterflies, it spends the winter as an adult. If you see the underside of the wings here, you can see that it looks pretty much like the bark that it hides under. It hides under like shag bark hickory. It'll hide in your eaves. You know, it basically stays here through the winter. It's a tough little guy. And the morning cloak eats willow, oak, hackberry, poplar, birch, hawthorn, and rose. Now, many of these plants are not planted much anymore. We have to be careful that, you know, some of the plants that we favor because they're not messy are also not of any use to these beautiful creatures that we share the environment with. This is the red spotted purple. It spends the winter as a caterpillar rolled up in a leaf. So be careful, rolled up in a willow leaf. It basically eats willows and wild cherries. So that's it. So you've got to have willows and cherries to have this beautiful red spotted purple, which is not uncommon, by the way. You may have seen these. This is, you might say this is a monarch, right? But it isn't. This is the viceroy. The viceroy and the monarch look very similar. I actually have a monarch down here so you can see the difference. See this, this line here? That's one of the main features. They also have a different kind of flight. If you're into butterflies, you'll learn to recognize the flight. But in any case, unlike the monarch, which doesn't overwinter here, it's very delicate. It's a tough guy and travels, you know, thousands of miles to Mexico every summer. But this one also overwinters as a, how does it overwinter? As a caterpillar too. It wraps up in willow leaves, and it also eats poplar and including cottonwood. And of course, that's another, you know, tree that people don't like to plant. But please, if you have a big property, plant some of these lovely trees that support these critters. So again, it's not a monarch. It actually is unpalatable, just like the monarch. And it's a type of mimicry where they're both, by having this color, advertising their unpalatability, palatability. The butterfly, the monarch eats milkweed, which has cardiac poisons, and the viceroy eats willows, which have salicylic acid, which is basically what aspirin is derived from, and they are also unpalatable. I just, before we get back to the building of the garden, I just, in case you haven't seen a monarch chrysalis, they are amazing, and I had to put one in here. This gold, like where, I want to know, like from a biochemist, where do these caterpillars get this metallic gold? It's got these little dots and this little zipper here, just the most beautiful thing. But the monarch caterpillar, the chrysalis, you'll see them in the summer, but they are not hardy. They don't look hardy, do they? And so the monarch in the winter is not here in any of its forms. So here we are going back to the yard. So I was thinking, what do we do about Riley? This is the piece of the plat that I was originally sketching on, and here's this loop. Let's give him a 5-foot wide grass loop to run on, right? Sounds perfect, right? However, oops, the flooded area moved somehow. I just love PowerPoint. Anyway, there's this flooded area in the back of the yard, and we have to accommodate that when we're thinking about what to do with this pup and how to deal with him. So here's what I came up with. I call it dry oval, wet oval. And when it's dry, he can run this whole route all the way around the yard. when it's flooded back there and it's muddy and he doesn't even want to go back there, or at least his owner doesn't want him to go back there, he can do the dry oval. And the cool thing happens here, because this is a different habitat. We can plant dry prairie here, and we can plant wet prairie here. And then of course we have a little bit of shade over here and under the willow. So we have lots of different habitats in this one yard. I thought I should share this with you. This is my this is how my particular sausage is made. I know it's a little bit ugly. I get a pencil out and basically the base map that's drawn in CAD. Here you can see there's this drop on the back of the garage. So I've built a swale here to a little rain garden, very small, probably one of the smallest rain gardens I've ever made, but it's got 3 black chokeberries in it. Here's our dry oval. Here's our wet oval. You can't really read, and I don't expect you to try to read my scribbles. But here we're putting a little bench on some gravel fines with a little brick edge. And we're not going to talk about these shrubs very much, but there's a pussy willow here. There's some swamp rose, and there's 3 red twig dogwoods. That's pretty much all I'm going to say about that. So I wanted to show you the plant list, not so that you can read it, but so that you can see. And when we look at other plant lists, we're going to kind of zoom in, so we won't have this kind of difficult to read stuff. But I wanted to show you what's on one of our plant lists and how it works. You'll see acronyms when you see our design that have the first 3 letters of the genus and the first 3 letters of the species. And when you look that up on the plant list, you'll see the botanical name and the common name, the number we're going to use, the heights, the colors, and the bloom time. And you'll see that in the dry and wet ovals, we actually have almost full sun. And generally, those prairie plants do not bloom much. We do have a couple of April, May bloomers there, but down here, these are the shade bloomers. So you see that some of them are April, May, a lot of them are April, May bloomers. And then these are grasses and sedges, which actually do bloom, but the bloom isn't significant. So here, and here are grasses and sedges. So you can see we have a lot of, and these are shrubs. We have a lot of species because we want to serve as many different kinds of bees, our native bees, our butterflies, and many, many other kinds of creatures, including subsoil creatures. And like each of our native bees has particular plants that they will go to because they have a particular size of, does a bee have a proboscis? I think it's called something else. But anyway, the butterflies as well. You want as many plants as you want a lot of diversity, and that's what we have here. So this is what our very patient CAD guy did with my drawing. It's oriented in the same way that we've been looking at the garden, but here it is straight up. So you can see those 3 letters and 3 letters. This is 3 silphium plants, which are going to be tall and big, but aren't even showing in the garden yet. We'll talk about those later. But this is our dry oval and our wet oval. We're also going to look at a few other things before we enter the ovals in this order. We created a swale and a little rain garden over here. We're going to look at that. Basically, under the willows, there's 1 plant I want you to look at, 1 species. We put 15 black currants over here, wild black currants, which are lovely plants, and they like a little moisture, so they'll be all right. Then over here where it's dry, we have our little, oh, and by the way, I just stole this off Google. This is, you know, a satellite view. So here's where the bench is with the little brick here and the fine gravel. And then over here, there's the back of the garage, and we'll look at that too before we hit the dry oval and the wet oval. So like I said, there's a lot to do here. First, I wanted to show you, okay, we had to take down that shade structure. So this is April 4th, 2019, and we're busily taking out the weeds, cutting the sod. You can see there, we've dug everything up, we've cut the sod. It's a really weird shape. That day, we had to do some of the prep work later because it was flooded and we really couldn't take the sod out. The sod cutter wouldn't run back there and the guys didn't want to use a shovel. And besides, we had a lot of other stuff to do that day. So we did the rest of the prep work with the planting a couple of weeks later, which is to say April 28th. And here we are creating the shape that I created when I designed this garden, the shape of the lawn, basically putting down some new sod. And here we are, kind of half planted. Somebody got overexcited here and they're ready to mulch already, but you can see there's a lot of plants yet to put in over here. But here we are, this is the dry oval and the wet oval, and we're at April 28th. This is the day that we did the actual installation. And here we are at the end of that very long day. It's not actually dark. This we had a big crew working very hard. And here you can see, this is where the garage just kind of dumps water down this little hill here. And we didn't want flooding over here. So we've dug a swale that goes to a rain garden. You can see the 3 black chokeberries. They're very small at this point. We have a couple boulder arrays. I love those. And over here we have the platform for the bench. Now I want to, before we start talking about specifics, this is a few months later. This is in August. So what is that? May, June, July, 4 months later. This is a look at the yard. Again, we're going to specifically talk about some of these plants, but they grow fast. Now, the cardinal flower we put in as gallons because we want them to bloom the first year. They're so amazing. This is the middle of the summer, looking back toward the garage. This is looking away from the garage in the middle of the summer, last summer. And this is the back where we have an elderberry here, and we will talk about this later too, but I just wanted to just kind of walk you through what the garden, parts of the garden looked like throughout for the first year and last year. So there was the 2019 from the spring and then last year. So here's the rain garden. You see, I want to talk about burr sedge because this is a burr sedge, this is a burr sedge, this is a burr sedge. You can plant it right in the gravel as long as it's got some soil underneath its roots. And that was May, beginning of May 2019. And this is later that day. This was a rainy day, and the homeowner actually sent me these photos because we weren't around. It was a couple weeks after we planted. So you can see the chokeberries sitting in water, which they love to do. We did have a few more things to come and plant and things to finish up at this point. I'm a little confused about the timing of it because there's some debris over here that we later took out. So I think, I'm not sure when we did that, but we did do it. And this is spring of the following year. Do you see those sedges coming up in that swale? I told you so. So there they are. But I did want to also tell you, you see over here where the water falls. I forget what I put up here. It might be geranium. You see the geranium very happy right here. This, I'm not sure how it's going to look this coming spring, but I think it needs some ostrich ferns over here. So we're going to put some back in. Alexander, if you're listening, I haven't told you this yet, but I think it's a good idea. Of course, he has to say yes. So this is only 4 months later than this. So here we are with the sedges coming up, and then by fall, by September, it's a different angle. I didn't know I was going to actually present like this, so I didn't necessarily get all the same angles, but look at this burr sedge. It's got these beautiful, this is why it's called burr, but they're like medieval maces here, these seed heads. And they stay on and they get brown in the winter and they're just wonderful. And then here you can see it's been a year and some months. You can see that the black chokeberries are developing. They're almost the height of the chain link fence back here. We're going to talk about the Rudbeckia later, so we'll leave that for now. Here we are under the willows, and I just wanted to point out the cinnamon fern because I love this fern. I actually should have gotten you a picture of the cinnamon stalks. I think it's the fertile fronds that come out, and in the winter they look like just cinnamon, brown cinnamon sticking up here. But these are picky. If you put them somewhere where they get too dry, they won't survive even if you have a wet spring. But this soil holds moisture enough and it's wet enough in the spring that we planted a whole lot of cinnamon ferns, and they will get to be big. They will touch each other here. Now, of course, we have some sedges and some marsh marigolds and some other plants planted here as well. And there is that pussy willow over here. But anyway, these cinnamon ferns are going to be the pièce de résistance of this part of the garden. Love those things. And again, you really need a moist soil or you can't have them. So I'm looking forward to them doing well here. It does get dry for a period of time, but I think it's not long enough to make them suffer. So this is, we're going around clockwise again. This is the shrub hedge, the wild black currants. This is right after we planted. In fact, you can see here is where we didn't even bother to take the sod out yet because it was so wet. But we put in 15 of these little guys. And the following May, here they are, they're blooming. Now their bloom is a yellow, it's very subtle, but if you get the blooms, you will get these lovely currants that are actually edible. And up here in the left top corner, you can see what they look like in the fall. They have a beautiful fall color. So this is going to be, they're going to get as tall as the fence when they're mature, which is a year or two more. And they're just going to be a lovely feature of this garden. In the foreground here, even though we do have wildness going on in this garden, the edges are planted with shorter stuff. And this is marsh marigold and star sedge. We'll be talking about them a little bit later, but I wanted to mention a pair of plants that I really like. I like them together. You've seen the burr sedge. Now we're going to look at what it does with great blue lobelia. So here you have, it's July. The lobelia is not up yet. You see it right here? I mean, it's not flowering yet. It's definitely up. The burr sedge is doing its thing. It's starting to turn yellow, as we saw in the other photo. 1 month later, there you have it, the blue lobelia and the burr sedge together. Isn't that just a beautiful, beautiful scene? I could just stand there and just take it in. And that's one of the things you should do. And if you're all gardeners, you you just kind of hang out and go, wow, isn't that gorgeous? So the shady area east of the garage has a few more species than this, but star sedge, foam flower, Jacob's ladder, and wild geranium are quite obvious in the second picture, although the first one is this homely photo of the first, that first rain, like 2 weeks after they were planted, and it looks pretty sad. But a year later, here you are, May 15th, 2020. These are foam flower. I wish this was a little bit better in focus, but you can kind of see it. This is the star sedge. It's blooming. This is how it blooms. Sedges are not, that's why we don't have a bloom time on the plant list. But it's basically a lovely, fine sedge that other stuff comes up among. And here's the foam flower. There's a lot of little ones over here. So next year we're going to have a lot of foam flower, and it does spread. We have Jacob's ladder and geranium. Those are blooming. Now I said there were a few other things here. You can kind of see the maidenhair fern, which is a gorgeous thing, but it takes a while to mature. So here's our dry oval, and this is the plant list just for that area. And here it is early in 2020. I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. We planted tufted hair grass here. That's on, we're not going to talk too much about the grasses, but it's a cool season grass. When you build a garden, think about the cool season, warm season. Do you see these clumps of brown grass over here? That's little blue stem. It's going to look beautiful later, but it really doesn't start doing anything in May. It doesn't really start doing its thing until June, even the end of June, where it becomes this beautiful, wonderful prairie plant. So the sedges are cool season. This tufted hair grass, which is a lovely grass, is cool season. And here you have some more burr sedge over here. You might get the idea that I like that sedge. This is same time of year. Here you can see the rattlesnake master. It's called Euringium eucafolium, which means foliage like a yucca. You can see those spiky, bluish, beautiful lower leaves on this plant. This is Jacob's ladder. There's a little more of it here, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff here that basically isn't showing in May. And here's that list up close where you can see the acronym here. We're going to be using this format so that you can kind of see. This is the common names over here, and these are the botanical names. And right now we're going to look at Ohio goldenrod and a little bit of the little blue stem. So this is the first year, September of the first year, and these were planted as plugs. Now, Ohio goldenrod is not like Canada goldenrod or even some of the, stiff goldenrod or some of the others that spread a lot, but they do grow fast. I love them. They like moisture, but they also do okay with dry, and they are not super aggressive, but they are a goldenrod, and they are beautiful because they're a goldenrod. Now you can see that the little blue stem is now, you see it, there's a little like river of blue stem, and you can see it coming up here. Now this is the first year, so it's not quite mature, and we have a little bit of rattlesnake master here coming up. But we'll see what happens later on with these plants. We want to talk about midsummer, where we're going to look at purple coneflower, prairie blazing star, and wild bergamot. Isn't that gorgeous? You can see the bench back here, and you can just kind of imagine sitting there. You might have noticed, by the way, that a new house was built next door during this process. When we first looked at the yard, there was just a big mess over there, and it continued to be a big mess for a long time, and now it's a big old new house. This is the blazing star, and then we have many of you, if you're native gardens, certainly know purple coneflower and wild bergamot, which is the native bee balm. Then we're going to look at rattlesnake master the following year. Remember, you saw like a little bit of blooming that one year. Well, there it is. Rattlesnake master has these amazing flowers that have all these little bracts that make them look like little spiky balls. Now you might be saying, well, where's the prairie dock? I think we talked about, we're going to look at prairie dock, the silphium. And this is some of that succession kind of thing I was talking about. I may have talked about, I don't even remember if I did, but right here, you see these tiny little leaves? This is a silphium plant. And Alexander doesn't know this, but this is going to be an amazing plant. It takes a while. It's a slow grower. So it's going to take a while before it looks like much of anything. I mean, here we are with the rattlesnake master rattling all over the place here. And the silphium is just these little tiny leaves. Well, here's what happens. This is not this garden because it's not grown this big yet, but the basal leaves get to be about 2 feet long. It's a big plant. And here against the sky, you see the blooms. They send up these stalks late in the summer, and Sometimes if you go visit a prairie, you'll see like a just yellow floating above the prairie. That's these silphiums. There are 4 different kinds of silphiums, and this is prairie dock. And they all kind of have this habit of some kind of amazing dramatic basal leaf, and then a taller stalk that comes up with yellow flowers. And they are just pollinator heaven. So down here, all we have is the palm sedge marked here. Again, this is the full list, and I've just put this little gray box around the ones that we're dealing with at the moment. And here you might say, well, where is this palm sedge? It is behind the boulder here. Can't really see it. This is May of 2020. It's taking its time. I'm going to show you a very pixelated picture. There's the palm sedge right there. I zoomed into a picture that was really much bigger, so you really can't see it very well, but you can see it poking out behind the boulder. And I'm going to show you some palm sedge from a different garden, because this is what it looks like behind a boulder. So I'm kind of like giving you one of my secrets here with the boulder and the palm sedge. That's Carex muskingamensis. It's just fantastic behind a boulder. Now, this can be a very aggressive sedge if it's in an area, especially that has a lot of sun and that is wet. And we're in the dry oval here, so we should be all right. But the thing to know about boulders is they actually create a little bit of a microhabitat, because they do hold moisture for longer than the surrounding area. So that's something to be aware of. So you can have a sedge that likes moisture right around the boulder. And if you're in a drier area, it's likely not to become very aggressive. I've seen this sedge take over. I mean, it's actually a nice ground cover, but you might not necessarily want it to do that. So getting to know these plants and how they act is sort of an important part of doing these garden designs. And again, my boulders and palm sedge, I'm going to have to stop doing that, because it's just too much of a signature. It's like, oh yeah, that's one of Monica's gardens. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Rudbeckia fulgida, which is called orange coneflower. It's also called showy black-eyed Susan. This is why we always use botanical names, because plants can have so many common names, especially from region to region, but also within the same region. So here in the fall of 2019, you see them, they're just these little plants blooming here in the corner, and you can see the edge of the rain garden over here. Now by July of last year, those black-eyed Susans, or orange coneflowers, or whatever you want to call them, they're full of buds right here. And just 1 month later, bang, there they are. This is one of the wonderful things about native plant gardens, is that every few weeks you have a different set of species doing their thing. And these guys are really showing their stuff here. So that, I believe, is it for the dry oval. We're going to look at the wet area plants. And as you can see, it's a whole different array. It's a different habitat. So we have rose milkweed, we have marsh marigold, we have cardinal flower. You've seen a little bit of this. We do have some burr sedge. Love that stuff. It likes it wet, it likes it dry. It's very, very tolerant of a lot of different kinds of environment. And we also have the Ohio goldenrod, so that in the fall, both of these beds are sort of tied together by the presence of this beautiful goldenrod blooming. So here we are. You can see the star sedge here. This is bucksbaum sedge. It's another lovely plant. But again, we're not going to focus on the sedges or the shrubs in the back here, although I'd like to point out this little elderberry in fall of 2019, because we're going to look at it the following year. This is that same area, but the spring of the following year. Here you see again, this is great blue lobelia, which is just sitting down here. It's the middle of July and it has yet to do its poosh thing where it gets all those blue, lovely blue stalks. It's not the greatest photo here, but there's some beautiful swamp milkweed growing here, and we're looking from the wet area to the dry area in this photo. So marsh marigold and star sedge, we looked at those already, and we're just going to take another little peek at those because they grow together. I told you I was going to tell you some secrets about my favorite pairings of plants, and this is one of them. Now, I've put a picture of what marsh marigold looks like later, and I kind of wish I was on the other view where I could just move it out of the way, but you can see here the marsh marigold is blooming, and they will spread and do this kind of a thing. And the star sedge too is coming up every spring. It comes up and it doesn't get taller than about a foot. We even have some sedges that get smaller than that. But this is the foliage of the marsh marigold. Sometimes by summer, if it's a hot, dry summer, they'll go dormant entirely. And then these sedges will be all that's on the edge here. Oh my goodness. These are two of my favorite plants. This is Queen of the Prairie and Culver's Root, and they bloom at the same time. We planted gallon plants of the Queen of the Prairie, so they're going to be more mature when you look at the garden than the Culver's Root, but I thought I'd show you some photos of these two flowers, not from this garden at this point, but look at the pink Queen of the Prairie. It just looks like, in situ, it just looks like cotton candy. And these little flowers, it's got a very subtle, wonderful scent as well. And then Culver's Root is just, it's a candelabra. It's just gorgeous. So here, July 15th, only a few months ago, still COVID time, the Queen of the Prairie were blooming their hearts out. I think I may have mentioned, well, maybe I didn't mention, there was a big empty area because the deer ate the Queen of the Prairie the year before, and I thought they weren't going to come back, but here they are. This is a very tough plant. And then here is the Culver's Root, and next year it'll be much thicker, and these two plants will be blooming together. It's just going to be fantastic. I should do this again with some 2021 plants. So rose milkweed and great blue lobelia, I think we already saw that. Got to take that slide out. And here we just have we have the cardinal flower Queen of the Prairie and the Ohio goldenrod, and this is later. So you see what happens to Queen of the Prairie? It gets these beautiful, its flowers turn into these beautiful coppery seed heads. And the foliage is wonderful, and it starts to get yellow. And over here we have the Ohio goldenrod. It's not quite blooming yet, but the cardinal flower is doing a crazy thing. And this was just August of this last summer. It was just gorgeous to come and visit this garden. I show you this because here the goldenrod is just starting to bloom, but it really has a beautiful, deep, typical, goldenrod color when it gets to really doing its thing. I had to show you that when you plant cardinal flowers, you will get ruby-throated hummingbirds. And the other thing about them, every photo that I've seen, and this is by a professional photographer, of the hummingbirds, it's like a perfect fit. When you see the hummingbirds in a cardinal flower, this is actually a fused set of stamens. So there's pollen on that. And it always looks to me like the plant is patting this hummingbird on the head. So here it is. And then the next cardinal flower that this hummingbird goes to is going to bring that pollen to the next cardinal flower. It's just kind of one of those wonders of nature that these two were built for each other. You can see that here. And that patting the hummingbird on the head is, I've seen that in hundreds of photos. It's how these guys get pollinated, by hummingbirds. So remember that little elderberry we were looking at from the year before? Well, by August of last year, it's about 3 times the size, and it will get to be a big shrub, although you can cut these things to the ground and they'll still flower that year. Elderberries are wonderful. You can see the berries developing here. The flowers are great too. You can make champagne out of them and they're very pretty. But people make wine and jellies and jams out of the berries. They have a very high anthocyanin content, which is an antioxidant that's in blueberries, and they're just a super healthy fruit if you want to get into making some jams with them. They're a little bit bitter, so or maybe astringent, so not so great right off the bush. Oh, I know what I wanted to say. They are the host plant, or one of many host plants actually, for another of our giant silk moths. And you may have seen, I remember when I was a kid, I used to see these big fat green caterpillars walking across the sidewalk. I mean, I live in the city and I don't see it much anymore. But one of my clients has a big elderberry bush next to a lilac, which is also, even though it's not native, it's also eaten by the Cecropia moth. And every year there are a bunch of these lovely cocoons in her viburnums. These things usually leave their host plant and go and find themselves a nice little dense bush to put their cocoon in. And I just have to show you the adult. It's the largest of our giant silk moths. And like I said, this garden is in Wilmette. They are in our area. Now this one is in perfect shape. It's just hatched. And it's, you can see it. They do, again, they are nocturnal like most moths. So you may not see them in all their glory like this, but boy, we have, I think we have 3 of them. We have the Luna moth too, and they're all just tremendous. They're just beautiful to look at. And if you plant willows, and these also eat willow, by the way, they're larvae. So if you plant willow and elderberry, you could very well get a bunch of these guys. Well, this is not going to work the way I thought it would. This is the Wind in the Willows slide, and it's supposed to be a little movie, but it isn't. So there you go. But you can see how the wind looks in that willow, and all of these plants in this dry bed are also swaying with the wind. It's quite nice. I think I covered up, I don't know what I did here, but anyway, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful garden, despite, I wish they would bury these utilities. Oh, look at that. When I advance the slide, we get our little movie. So the homeowner took this little movie and sent it to me, and I just thought it was wonderful. I mean, that he's appreciating his garden. This is the, you can see the little blue stems swaying in the wind, the rudbeckia. So that was our little Wind in the Willows. So I thought I would throw in, we're pretty much through the planting and development of this garden. I would throw in some thoughts about winter, because you definitely don't want to take down all of your, if you don't have to. I mean, if you're in the front yard and everything's leaning all over and your neighbors don't like it, you have to cut down your natives, and they'll come back because they're all about the roots. But if you have a chance to leave them up, 1, they're pretty. And 2, there's a lot of insect life, butterflies, moths, and many other things living in this detritus. There's another view, and you can see the red twig dogwoods aren't quite mature yet, but they're coming along. And here's another winter view. And if this were your yard and you thought this, I think this is an aster. If you thought that looked a little, oh, I think it's actually Ohio goldenrod. If you thought it looked awful, you just chop it off. No big deal. But you want to leave stuff because, as we said, some butterflies overwinter in leaves, some overwinter as adults. And finally, we're going to talk about one that overwinters as a chrysalis. This is the black swallowtail chrysalis. And this guy is tough. And you'll find these hanging around throughout the winter because this is how the black swallowtail overwinters. Now, this is a beautiful butterfly that you've all seen. This one's nectaring on some milkweed. The reason it's so common and the reason it will never, it's never going to be endangered is it eats the Apiaceae or the carrot family, which means it eats dill, it eats fennel, it eats carrots, it eats Queen Anne's lace. So it's got plenty of food. It's a generalist. It eats this family that has species all over the world. This is the native that it eats. This is golden Alexanders. Now, there aren't any in this garden because if you plant it early on in the garden's life, it can get to be very, very exuberant, let's call it. But I am hoping, and along with those ostrich ferns, I'm hoping to put some golden Alexanders in now that the garden is getting more mature, because again, they are the native, one of a couple of native plants that the black swallowtail will eat. Now, if any of you have seen my presentations before, I've used this before, I'd like to end my presentations with this, oops. I might not be able to do it actually on this one. It's the emergence of a black swallowtail. It looks like I can't get it to work. Oh, well, a few of you who have seen other presentations of mine have already seen this. But basically it's the emergence, you can see a crack here and the butterfly just kind of opens it up and walks out and starts pumping its wings. This is a particularly fun one because a little boy walks up and goes, "Ah, cool." And you know, if we don't treat our young ones, if we don't expose them to the beauty and wonders of nature, they're not going to love it and they're not going to take care of it. So that's all for now. And I thank you for, I know that was a lot coming at you, bang, bang, bang. But I really had a lot to share and I was really happy to do so. So thank you. And we're going to have a question period. First, I think we want to talk about what's going on next month with Chicago Living Corridors. Peggy, are you going to talk about this one?
You have to unmute. Yes, we have had, each month we've had a different topic, and in January we had a program on shrubs, and so we're moving forward to having the program on native trees, and presented, as you see, by Melissa Kustik, who is with the Morton Arboretum. She's one of their tree specialists. So lots of good information to come up. It's again on a Thursday evening, March 25th, 1 month from now, and also hosted by the Barrington Area Library, which we are so thankful for partnering with us on these. So we'll hope to see you back for this program.
All right. And we do have the sign up all set on our website, so you can go ahead and get right on that list now if you wanted to do so. So we've got some questions for you here, Monica, if you've got a little bit of time for us.
I have a little time. Don't make them too hard. This is my bedtime.
Fair enough. We've all been warned. I have a question here. Someone has a pussy willow whose leaves turned gray and died. And they're wondering if that can be fixed or if the plant can be saved.
I am not an expert in plant diseases, but I would suggest, I mean, it may be, depending on the size of the pussy, if it's a mature pussy willow, they are not long-lived plants. It's possible it's at the end of its life, but if it's simply, if the foliage is simply grayed out or dried out, you might try renewal pruning and extra watering. Last year was very challenging for a lot of plants because of the very wet spring followed by an extremely hot period. So it could be that it's just stressed. So you might just wait and see. But again, there might be some disease. I'm not really aware. They really don't have many diseases. You could look that up, but I have a feeling you're going to be okay, that it's just you're talking about a stressed plant. But renewal pruning is something you can look up on the web. It's basically cutting your pussy willow all the way down, and to each type of shrub has different, some of them are up down to 5 inches and some you want to leave a couple of feet, but that might be helpful. But I'm afraid that this isn't quite my area. So you might want to go to somebody who's, an expert in trees and shrubs, like the lady who's presenting next week from the Chicago Botanic Garden.
Angie is wondering if mulch is okay for native bees.
If mulch is okay for them.
Mm-hmm.
We use mulch between our plants. After a while, they pretty much don't need it. But many native bees nest in the ground. And if you have an area that has a lot of native bee holes in the ground, you might want to wait with the mulch until you stop seeing them. We have a garden where there were, I don't know, hundreds of these bees. We had built the garden the year before and they were just everywhere. They like sand and they like open areas. In other words, so where there's nothing growing basically, and bare areas are good to have, by the way. So we didn't mulch, we left that, but then the bees kind of disappeared. They did their thing. And we did put some mulch down at one point in the year, but I expect in the spring, the mulch will be dissipated and they'll be back. So I would say no. If you have native bees, don't mulch. If you don't have native bees, don't worry. I would mulch if you have spaces between plants. Again, with natives, by the 3rd year, we don't expect to be mulching. We do mulch the first, when we plant a garden, and we often mulch thereafter. And people who like formality, who like to keep their plants far apart with mulch in between, not everybody likes a wild native garden. They're mulching all the time. But again, going back to the bees, if you see native bees and they have little itty bitty holes, it's pretty obvious. You can see them going in and out. You might want to keep the mulch off of that.
Amy is wondering if the ferns have shallow enough roots that it won't harm the foundation of the garage.
Yeah, they do spread sideways, but I don't really worry about garage foundations that much because we don't generally have much trouble with water incursion or anything like that. I'm not going to plant them like right against that garage, but I'm not going to worry too much about that.
Nalini is wondering if you can recommend some native ground covers or something relatively short for dry, shady slopes.
Sure. There's Carex pennsylvanica, which is a dry, shady slope plant. It's often it's called oaks, common oak sedge. It's often under oaks. But there's also, there's a whole series of plants. Let me see. Wild ginger is another. I happen to have a list right in front of me. Dry shade. White woodland aster is a good one. Heart-leaved aster. Wild geranium doesn't like wet, so that might be good for you. If you're feeling like mayapple is another good one. You can put woodland sunflower in, but you need a lot of space. It gets tall and it can also get very exuberant. There's a couple wonderful goldenrods that like dry shade. A zigzag goldenrod is one of them, which is Solidago flexicalis. Maidenhair, there are a couple of ferns that are okay with dry, including the ostrich fern. They like a little bit of moisture, but maidenhair fern is one that is okay with dry. And then there's another sedge, which is very fine and never gets bigger than 8 inches. It's a really sweet sedge called Carex eburnia, ivory sedge. That's another one that can be used in that dry shade situation. So that's a handful of plants for you to try.
Sure. Diana is wondering how to keep bunnies out of early Liatris. Apparently everyone else is also wondering that because a whole bunch of people chimed in.
About Liatris or about bunnies in general?
Well, they're wondering how to keep bunnies out of them.
They seem to prefer the
eating them.
natives, of course.
Of course.
And they
yeah.
love the Liatris. They munch it down to the ground so it doesn't even have a chance to sprout.
Well, I mean, bunnies are a pain. You know, when we had crows before the West Nile, they used to eat baby bunnies, which was very helpful. So you had bunnies, but you didn't necessarily, you weren't overrun with them. Now that we have foxes and other other predators, that should help the, you know, even out the bunny population, but getting to what to do about them. There is this stuff, and it sounds bizarre, but there's this stuff called liquid fence. I would not suggest, by the way, fox urine because it's cruelly extracted and the rabbits get used to the idea that, oh, it smells like a fox, but there isn't one here, so don't use that. Liquid fence is basically garlic and sulfur and some other awful smelling things. And if you spray it on, you have to spray it, you have to read the instructions. You have to spray it every week for a while, and then the plant actually absorbs it, and the rabbits don't like eating it. And it's somewhat effective against deer. Now, so I suggest you get some of that, but it depends on how, you know, much time you have to spend working on that. Once you've done this a couple of weeks in a row, you can stretch it out a little more, but it's pretty effective. Again, though, it depends on how many you have, how hungry they are. In some cases where we've had really gardens that were really overrun with rabbits, we fenced. So think about fencing if the liquid fence doesn't work. But it's pretty effective in some cases. It also depends on the bunny. Bunnies are like cats, you know, some eat spaghetti and others will only eat, you know, wet food. Some bunnies will destroy one plant and not another, and then the next door bunny will do something different. So I would try liquid fence first.
Okay. They have a yard full of clover, but nope.
They won't eat the clover?
Well, the other stuff apparently tastes better.
Oh, interesting.
But that's a follow-up question. What should I leave in my lawn and what should I pull out? I'm letting the back lawn go native, but I don't want to leave stuff that's, you know, that's just totally invasive and not native.
Well, most of the stuff that grows in lawns is not native, such as the white clover and creeping Charlie, and I can mention, you know, a bunch of stuff. But they do have nectar. You know, I mean, it's better to have a lawn that has that stuff in it because little bees will use it and butterflies will use it. So I'm always saying, well, if you have some lawn, let it go a little wild. I don't really, I mean, if you're mowing it, you're not going to have, you know, really problems. It's not going to look emerald green. It might not look, you know, ideally, you know, whatever Scott's tells you your lawn ought to look like, but leaving flowers. And you can also, you could probably seed in some of the smaller natives as well. Haven't really tried that, so I'd have to think about that. If you want to email me, I could probably come up with a, you know, a mix that you could sprinkle on your lawn. But if you have creeping Charlie, that's gonna overtake.
Okay. So that's what I'm saying. Anything I should really pull out. So I should pull out the creeping Charlie for sure.
Yeah, I mean, some people leave it in. The garden that we just looked at has a lot of creeping Charlie and I think it's got a bunch of little weeds in it. I think he tried to eradicate the creeping Charlie. I'll have to talk to him. I'm not sure he's still on that war. It is easy to pull out because it's very shallow rooted, but it's if it's all over the place, that can keep you very busy and then you won't have any lawn. So if you do that, you might want to add some seeds, some grass seeds.
Good idea. Yeah. Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question. So Linda is wondering if you amended the soil after you took up the sod.
You know, we usually don't. In the area around the garage, we put some leaf mold, it was very weedy there and we took out a lot of soil. I think we added soil and some leaf compost, but generally, especially with the prairie plants, they don't like fertility. It's not, you know, they develop their own fertility with the roots of the grasses mixing with the, you know, with the deep roots and the fibrous roots mixing together. If you put a lot of fertility into your soil, if you're amending it and then planting prairie species, you may end up with a prairie that just goes like this because it gets too tall and it falls over. You might see a lot of that actually, because our native plants, if you plant it in the right, you know, like if you're in sand, you want to make sure you pick the right species. I suggest Prairie Moon and Prairie Nursery have excellent catalogs that will list the type of soil, the type of light, etc. If you pick the right plants for the space, you shouldn't need to amend, and we generally don't. Again, some of these woodlands that have poor soil for whatever reason, because we had to take it out or whatever, we may add some compost, but generally no.
Okay, I think that's about all the time that we have today. So I wanted to take a moment to just thank you for speaking with us, Monica, and thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody.